Here's Sunny doing a demonstration. Sunny, was this in Brisbane?
Yes, at the Kedron Wavell in Brisbane. I think we had about 350,
And
350 people there. Yeah.
and you do quite a, do you still do big meetings like that?
I've not done any for a couple of years because my health has not been too good. But yeah, I'd like to do more of them. They sort of stopped with the COVID.
Yeah.
Sort of got in the way of things. But we had about, it was we had about 350 people at Kedron Wavell at those ones. So it was a nice, yeah, a nice capacity audience, really. I love the big energies of the,
The,
some of the bigger forums. Yeah.
and James Van Praagh has given Sunny a wonderful testimonial over here. It talks
Hmm.
about the Sunny brought in all the names of my aunts and uncles and the addresses of where they lived. It was staggering.
That was actually a trance reading I did for James. So I did that one in trance when he came
Oh,
to Brisbane.
okay.
Patrick by Control, he does survival evidence in trance. So that reading was done in the trance state. And yeah, there's some videos of my trance readings somewhere there. I don't know
They're
where it
here.
is.
Well, have a look. We've got the
Trance
videos
seance.
here.
That's right. Yeah,
Uh,
trance
sh
seance.
it's got lots of videos here of different examples of some of
Yeah,
his communication, which are pretty impressive, if I could say. And you've also got some stuff, some of your trance work. Now, of course,
that's right. Yes.
what we're here to talk about today is Sunny's book, which is he's got three books out: Secrets of Psychic Mediumship, How We Attract Our Potential Future, and this one, Explore Your Soul's Purpose Through Trance and Inspirational Control. So
That's right.
please have a look at Sunny's website, Sunny Burgess Spirit Listener. And I'm just going to stop sharing at that point, and I'm going to introduce you to Sunny. Sunny, can you tell everybody a little bit about where you started on mediumship, some of your early experiences,
Mm.
and where you're going now? What's important in your life?
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming this morning. Hope I can be coherent. It is early our end in Australia, so really excited to be here. Thank you. Yeah, I was born in the early 1960s, and my nana, who was a spiritualist medium, she took me to churches from about 1977, 1978. So I was fortunate to see some of the old mediums work. Gordon Higginson on many occasions at the churches in Denton and Stockport and around the Churches Hyde, churches in the Manchester area, but also quite a few of the other mediums. My nana knew also Bertha Harris, who was one of the wartime mediums. She used to give readings to, I think she gave readings to Winston Churchill, very famous medium, Bertha Harris, Battling Bertha, for those who have read her book, very famous trance medium in the war years. Worked with people like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Ernest Oughton. He was introduced her to the spiritualism. So yeah, very privileged to see some of the old mediums work in the back end of the 1970s. Then I started working. My first work at the SNU churches were in 1988. That's when I first started working. And then through into moving to Australia in the 1990s. Started working 1993 in Victoria as a medium and the churches there. Then through to Brisbane in 1999, started working at some of the spiritual centres there. I started to venture out on my own. I think it was around about 2006, started to put public shows on for the public at some of the RSL clubs and some of the venues. And these were charity functions to raise money for orphanages. Did a lot of humanitarian work through fundraising in mediumship. One of the main projects was to build an orphanage in Bodh Gaya in India that now educates, I think, 450 children in Bodh Gaya. So I did a lot of humanitarian work through fundraising. Myself now don't do as much public work. I was sick with very sick with cancer the other year, but sort of got over that. And do a lot of private readings. I have, I think, 2,000 people waiting for private readings, so I'm not really taking on any more private readings, but very, very busy in the private reading. I love connecting with people on a one-on-one basis. My passions are healing, so I love doing healing for people, but also connecting through the aura when I read for people. But as I say, the private readings, yeah, I've been doing intensely, well, since the 1990s, but really probably intensely since about 2007 now, doing private readings. I had a little foray into education in the early 2000s, where I did a university degree and then started a PhD, doctoral studies in education. Didn't follow that through, but it was a little foray. 3, 4 years thinking, oh yes, wanted to help children through education, but then 2005, I just realized my gift was in mediumship and spirit. Obviously, that's where I was meant to be, doing readings for people. And so I've worked probably quietly, doing one-on-one readings, probably, over the last 20 years now, constantly. It's hard work, but it's a passion. And I just do that because, yeah, it's obviously that's where I've been guided. So that's me in a nutshell.
Beautiful, Sunny. Thank you. Now,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about your trance work. What's your experience of trance?
Yeah, trance work. I mean, a lot came from early childhood. I had a chronic somnambulism as a sleepwalking somniliquism. Put my teeth in, if in a sleep state. So I think that was something, even as a young child of 4 or 5. Chronic sleepwalking, sleep talking. I never realized until later. I think I read, I think it was Alan Kardec's book I read, who was the forefather of Spiritism, Alan Kardec. And he talked about the link between somnambulism and somniliquism and deep trance abilities. So I started to realize that then that was always with me from an early age. But really, I've been sitting for trance for 25 years now, every week for 25 years, sitting for trance. A beautiful, committed group of sitters. Well, the present group's been going for 13 years. But before then, I was another 12 years. I was sitting every week when I was down in Melbourne. But yes, very, very committed to trance, and working with those states of trance. My first experience was in, I think it was 1994, when I was in Melbourne with a beautiful teacher of mine and mentor, Michael Withington, in Melbourne, and that was like a spontaneous experience I had, where I got up and I was talking, and as I was talking, then the power that moved me to stand up from spirit and start talking was so powerful. My consciousness sort of ebbed away halfway through the talk, because the influence of trance is always about degrees of influence. It starts off with 1 degree, and then it goes deeper as you move through the trance talk. And this was often talked about by the old mediums when they used to stand up. They would always start off in conscious trance, and then the influence would move them into states of where their awareness would be withdrawn from their body, of what they were saying, or the sound of their voice. So it was always undulation. It was always degrees of trance. But I did experience this in part spontaneously in 1993. That's probably the only time I've really experienced that. Of awareness being withdrawn, but it's always a deep displacement when I work in the in the trance, in the deep trance state. So there are guides who come through and bring a lot of philosophy in trance, and then there's the Patrick, who's my Irish guide, who comes forward and brings survival evidence. So any of you interested in those aspects of trance, the little videos are on the website. where the survival evidence is brought forward.
So tell us about your research project. I understand you've been working on this project for 10 years?
Yeah, well, yeah, at least 10 years, many thousands of hours of research have gone into the into writing the book. I mean, they say history is the greatest teacher, and originally there's books I've read along the way that deeply stimulated me. And one book, because there's so many people from America here, was by Robert Galen Cheney, and American, and he wrote particularly how in America before the 1940s, which is really where spiritualism started in America, and as you all know here, the trance and the physical trance and the mental trance run together. I don't know, I guess how many of your viewers know this. Those obviously who do it certainly know this. But he talked about how the trance before the 1940s, the mental mediums, the mental trance mediums, they always developed into being physical trance mediums. So they developed trumpet mediumship, direct voice mediumship, but it always came from their mental mediumship. So they started off as mental trance mediums, and then developed into physical trance mediums. I mean, we have categorization, we have mental perception of those who know, clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience, and then we have mental trance. And when you, particularly if you learn at an establishment like the Arthur Findlay College, where I've also attended on numerous occasions, they do teach you the difference. These teachings, obviously handed down by people like Gordon Higginson and some of the great mediums, the difference between sitting in mental trance and physical trance. So you sit in mental trance, and it's an enlivening of the mind. So it's a quickening of the mind with mental trance. But physical trance is where you actually have become subdued. So it's like putting a heavy blanket of energy over your aura, and you slowly become very, very heavy in physical trance. And that's the build-up, the discharge of the etheric body, which is all the little etheric particles, the ectoplasm, which we all have to some degree. And when the ectoplasmic particles, the ethereal particles, discharge into the aura, it creates a heaviness, a subdued feeling. So those were that was where the research began. And the research was looking at physical trance and mental trance, how they run parallel, and trying to sort of understand more the early trances of physical mediums, not physical mediums, of trance mediums, going back to Leonora Piper, again an American. Many of you will, of course, know Leonora Piper's work. She was born worked in Boston, Massachusetts, in the 1880s and the 1890s. Again, most amazing mental trance medium, together with people like Gladys Osborne from the UK. Yeah, they called her the White Crow, Leonora Piper, because scientists were so intrigued by her work. And she did work in the somnambulistic states, which are the somnambulistic states of trance, not really understood much now in the history of spiritualism, how they worked, and how much in common they had with physical mediums. I'll give you an example. Maurice Barbanel, Silver Birch, who many of you will have heard of, he was tested while in deep trance. They put Cushing pins into his arm with his guide's permission, of course. His guide's permission, they stuck Cushing pins in his arm while he was in deep trance, and didn't feel a thing. And that was Maurice Barbanel. Not many people know that. That's written in one of his books. It's one of his rarer books. There are some rare editions of his books that I managed to obtain. And then we have Leonora Piper in somnambulistic trance. One of the scientists, they cut her wrist while she was in trance, obviously with the guide's permission, cut her wrist. And as they cut her wrist, the blood didn't flow. There was no incision from the mark in the wrist. Afterwards, of course, when she came out of trance, the blood started to flow. and there was a scar left on the wrist. So these sort of this phenomena with some of the deep mental trance mediums, I could see there was parallels to what mediums had also done in physical trance, because with physical trance mediums who produce ectoplasm materializations, they have also been tested. Stuart Alexander, in his book, he talks about he's a trumpet medium from the UK, still alive, talks about the twisting of the pincers in the flesh, and obviously in those deep states, they don't feel trance. Daniel Douglas Home, who many of you would have heard, they used to, in the Victorian eras, they used to levitate him out of the windows. He was a physical medium, and he used to hold hot coals. They called it innocuous fire. So he used to hold hot coals while in that state, and it would not burn his hands. So this is where it was, this is where the research began. So
tell us about some of your favorite discoveries.
Well, the discoveries really that came from the research. There's so many books here, but there was understanding this idea of what happened to the old mediums when they were in the somnambulistic, the deep trances that are rarely talked about or not really understood. A great book was by Harry Edwards. We all know Harry Edwards, the healer. And the book that he wrote was The Mediumship of Arnold Clare, who was a physical medium. So they really put it under the spotlight. They talked about how in these trance states, there was actually a form of trance called rough control. And this idea of rough control, it very much described Leonora Piper's trance. And really, it was all about the idea that the aura, there was a displacement of the etheric body, which is the etheric double, really, that's what you could call it. And how this etheric body, the etheric double, not talked about much, you won't hear it talked about, but this was the mechanism. The etheric double used to dislodge with the old mediums, as it does with physical mediums. Physical mediums were producing ectoplasm. They also dislodge the etheric double because that's where the ectoplasm builds up from. So this book by Harry Edwards was very, very informative because it talked about rough control, where the mediums were catatonic. They would have jerking of the body, clonic jerking, very, very spasms. It was it was a histrionic, but it wasn't feigned or anything. It was just part of their going into the deep delta states where they would go unconscious, as Leonora Piper worked, and to an extent Gladys Osborne. Some of the old mediums, they would go into these unconscious states, and so their etheric body was actually dislodging itself, was coming out. The etheric body, the research really, just to sort of make this more concise, worked around understanding the aura. And one of the best descriptions of the human aura, as you're all familiar with, is the fact that there is it's strands of electromagnetic energy. So we could sort of see it's like strands, vertical and horizontal, strands of electromagnetic energy that are interwoven with etheric particles. And that's after, many, over 30 years of being involved in this, and this extensive research, I think was the best description of the composition of the aura I've ever come across. So it's like strands of electromagnetic energy interwoven with etheric particles. But if we drill down and we look at the etheric particles, we can see that this really is the ectoplasm. This is what mediums exude when they produce ectoplasm in physical mediumship. So when the aura is extended, there is a release of the etheric particles as the aura extends away from the body. And this energy field in deep trance mediumship with Leonora Piper, this energy field then produces the light that the spirit controls Dr. Finuit used to attune to. And in Arnold Clare's book, this is why it was called rough control, or it's called one-way control, because the attunement came into the medium's aura. So the spirits would step into that energy of light around the medium's aura, and they would attune to it. So it was very much similar to physical mediumship in this way. And so this was the main thrust of the book, the research that got the book going, because it was deeply physiological. You know, obviously the withdrawal of the etheric body does have many physical effects on the body, sort of going into delta, being very cold, the temperature of the body. So there were many physical effects of these early forms of mediumship. And just one more thing here, this then enabled me to understand how the trance of the old days has evolved. So there's a natural evolution away from these deeper states into something which was much lighter, which wasn't involving the extrusion of the etheric double. This was actually involving just more of a mind-to-mind, a telepathic connection.
So would the more modern trance be safer for mediums?
Yes, absolutely. Because the old trances, the somnambulism, they caused huge depletions of energy. Like Leonora Piper, you know, she could only do maybe one trance sitting a day, and then she had extreme fatigue, because to bring the consciousness back to the body again, this would it was very debilitating for the medium. There was health issues, and the etheric body, the etheric double, which is displaced, as I've explained. This is also the vitality body. And when we look at theosophism with Arthur Powell, he was a great theosophist, and we look at how they describe the etheric double in great detail, and it's also called the vitality body, because it's through the etheric body that it actually links all the neurons in the brain. So we register pain through the etheric body. And if we remove the etheric body, we no longer feel pain. So this was why they could do the pincers, or they could stick the pins in the arm and the mediums didn't feel it, because the etheric body coats all the neural transmitters in the brain. All the nerves in the brain are coated by the etheric body. There's a Christian mystic called Dascalos, who was based in Cyprus, who Harry Edwards also sat with. Harry Edwards was initiated into his inner circle of healers. He did visit him. And he did a lot of research into the etheric double. The Spiritism, Allan Kardec, also a lot of mention of this, and particularly Chico Xavier, the neuropsychic emanations of the etheric body, the etheric double, they also talked about. So they talked about the etheric double is a body which, when you die, it also dies with you. So this was the body when the old mediums used to exude it, as ectoplasmic mediums do, physical mediums. They've also had a lot of health problems. The ones that were working with the ectoplasm, very dangerous for their health. These deep trance mediums, in exuding their etheric double, also had many health issues. So yes, as you say, moving over to the telepathic trance was much healthier for the mediums. And one of the key aspects of the research was that there was in the one of the circles in the 1930s, 20s, 30s, a medium called Mrs. Willett, who was actually investigated with Sir Oliver Lodge and Lord Balfour. And that's the Lord Balfour who did the Balfour Declaration in 1917, who created the state of Palestine. So they were big, prominent figures in history. Lord Balfour and Sir Oliver Lodge, they sat with Mrs. Willett, a very famous medium, and Frederick Myers and Edmund Gurney. So Frederick Myers, he set up the Society of Psychic Research. He was the founder of the Society of Psychic Research. So he, in spirit, worked through Mrs. Willett and said from the spirit world said from the spirit world that they were moving away from this extrusion of the etheric double towards telepathic trances. And this is documented. So this is one of the cornerstones of spiritualism, the history of, we knew then, which is very rarely talked about, very rare research that was uncovered. So the idea then that Frederick Myers, who when he was alive, he called it tellurgic trance. And Sir Oliver Lodge in his book, one of the great commentators of spiritualist history, calls it tellurgic trance. So tellurgic trance is when the spirits used to work directly on the brain of the medium through this, the inner aura, the physical aura. So when the etheric body was dislodged, the physical aura became very thick, like a thick pea soup. And that thick pea soup was the light, or as Leslie Flint said, the light is actually the ectoplasm. That's how he described it in his book, Leslie Flint. The light, medium's light, is actually ectoplasm. And Gordon Higginson, in one of his lectures, also says that the extrusion of the power for the medium, the power of the light, these are all interchangeable words that spiritualists use. The power is actually a form of ectoplasm that is released from the skin pores of the medium. This is what Gordon Higginson said in his lecture. All these are fully referenced in my book. Every quote I've given here is referenced in the book with the date of the book and the book that it's written from. So everything I'm saying today is fully referenced in the book, as research has to be. So Gordon Higginson, again, the lecture where he references this, and Leslie Flint. So these connections were already made. So this power, which is the thickening of the etheric particles in their aura, is tellurgic trance. This means that the spirit used to come into the aura of the medium, into the body, it's called absorption as well, or over the body, so close. And they used to work on the brain, the neurons in the brain. So they had direct influence over the neurons in the brain in this way. The two sets of nerves are motor nerves and speech nerves. The motor nerves, they could move the mediums around while they were unconscious. Gordon Higginson as well, they'd move him around through plant pots and walking down stairs with his eyes closed, and so they could operate with the body while the medium was unconscious. So this state is called tellurgic trance. And through Mrs. Willett, Frederick Myers, who's in spirit, and Edmund Gurney, they said the spirit world were experimenting, moving away from tellurgic trance and into the telepathic trance, which is the lighter trance. Now, these trances then were developed in the 1930s, the 1940s, with most of the prominent mediums like Helen Hughes and many of the mediums that then you'd read about. And there's a lot of research around this.
Absolutely fascinating, Sonny. Look, I think we'll hand it over to questions.
Yes, absolutely.
We'd particularly like to hear from people who are trance mediums or who have any questions. And if you'd just like to raise your hand at the bottom of the screen. And Daniel, over to you.
Well, I'm not a trance medium.
It doesn't matter, but you know a lot of trance
not
mediums.
as far as I know. But Sonny, I confess to a fascination with the skull experiment, yes, and how that seemed to differ in its approach and its technique, the nature of the trance, and so on, from at least my understanding of conventional mental and physical mediumship. So, what would you say about skull generally, and from what you understand about it?
Yeah, well, the skull experiments, obviously, with Robin Foy, who I think is now in spirit. Is that correct? Has he
Yes,
passed over, Robin Foy? And
yeah.
I know my good friend Christine Morgan did sit with them in the cellar of the the room. There was a lot of experimentation with something called etherealization, which is actually different degrees of when we're talking about physical mediumship, as opposed to physical trance, which this is what we're talking about, not mental trance. But there was an interchange. So I think the medium was the name Bennett. I'm not quite sure what his name was. Was it Alan Bennett or something? What his name was?
Alan and Diana Bennett are a couple.
Bennett, that's correct. Yes, that's correct. So, obviously, from what I understand, is they worked in the mental trance. They were mental trance mediums, so they were able to work with the mental trance, but also then they worked through the physical trance. So the two are interchangeable. And in the evolution of trance, like I said, with the book by Robert Galen Cheney, who talked about the American mediums who started off as mental trance mediums and then became physical trance mediums. The two are interchangeable. So from what I understand, the Bennetts, they did Alan and Diane Bennett. They did, they worked through the mental trance, and then they worked into the physical trance. The degree of how the power built up, because the power we're talking about is the ectoplasm or the etheric energy. There are there's teleplasm, there's photoplasm, there's different sort of ideaplasm. There's all different forms of manifestation of ectoplasm coming out of the body to produce the phenomena. I think in modern day physical mediumship, they're not extruding the ectoplasm in the same way. They're using more of the etheric particles in a slightly different way to build up the phenomena. But that's all I understand of the skull. I do know that it was closed down. I have read the book Witnessing the Impossible. It's quite a thick a Bible of 600 odd pages. I have read the book, and I know they closed it down because they were something. I know it sounded very much like Doctor Who, but of course, all this I believe that there was Time Lords that actually told the circle to close down because there was some interference or things could get out of hand. So they did. I believe they closed. I think that's correct. Is that correct, Wendy? Or I think
Daniel made a film about the skull experiment.
Oh, you made a film, did you? Yes. Yeah.
So
I can I'll put the link in the chat.
Put the link for
I'd like to have a look at it. Yeah. So anyway, just to understand how you express all this in your terminology. So you're using the term ectoplasm in a very much more general way.
Yes.
Various subsets of it.
That's correct. I mean, I use it in context, Daniel, to the old forms of mediumship. I use it in context to the etheric double. That's what I'm talking about. So the etheric double to explain somnambulism, like Leonora Piper. And obviously you would have heard of Leonora Piper, Gladys Osborne, the old mediums, to explain their deep trance, to explain tellurgic trance, how power built up around the medium's body, how spirit attuned into this power. So yes, I'm using it more, coming from that way, but also making the links between the mental trance and the physical trance of the old ectoplasmic, like Leslie Flint, obviously, people like that, Alec Harris, the physical mediums. Modern day mediumship, the things have moved into different areas, but my research was making the historical links about this old trance, but really looking at the commentators as well, like all the commentators, the spiritualist commentators in the book. They all look at the, describing it in the same way. And Ivy Northridge and, the old commentator Grace Cook, many of the old mediums, there's a plethora of them really all talking about this etheric double. Does that make sense, Daniel? Anything?
Yes, some of it's a bit over my head. I'm hearing it for the first time, which leads me to another question, which is in direct voice mediumship.
Yes.
Is an aspect of the medium's subtler ectoplasm involved in creating that point source in the room from where the voice emanates, or is that something completely different? How do you see that?
Yep. Absolutely. Again, it's extrusion of the etheric double. So the ectoplasm then builds up the etheric particles. And as we said originally, we said the aura is strands of electromagnetic energy interwoven with etheric particles. So it's like a stitching, really. Even ectoplasm itself, it goes horizontal, and then the stitching that sort of goes across. So that is the aura, in its composition. It's just that it's been extruded, and obviously physical mediums have more of the etheric particles. There's more of these etheric particles that they have, like meters and meters of it within the body. And obviously this is extruded from this, around the muscles. It's all within the body, the stomach. But yes, absolutely, to make the direct voice is a box which is sits on the shoulder of the medium, as Leslie Flint. It's like a tube of ectoplasm goes to the larynx, and then it sits on the shoulder. It's been described as looking like an organ, the ones who photographed it, as it sits on the shoulder. And then the voice comes out of that. So that's the direct voice. But indirect voice is when the ectoplasm goes to the roof or in another part of the room, and then the voice comes independently, indirect voice. So it's the two phases.
Great, thank you very much. One very important question.
Yes.
Daniel Douglas, is it Hume or home? Is it pronounced Hume in spite of being spelled home?
It's spelled, hey, I think it's spelled Holme. I think.
Okay, anyway, it doesn't matter. Just a curiosity.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it is. It's but fascinating. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Daniel.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for your question. Thank you, and well done on the what have you done with the skull? That's wonderful that you've had that involvement. Yeah.
Gary, over to you.
Yeah, Sunny, thank you, Wendy. Sunny, thank you for this presentation. And I wanted to ask, when you spoke about telepathic trance, would it be synonymous with the term often used, at least in the United States, as a conscious trance or a conscious channeling?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
The book, good question. The book actually documents the phases of evil. I mean, obviously what I've talked about today is only a fraction of what's in the book, but the book actually describes the progression, between unconscious trance, progressing into conscious trance, and then progressing into inspirational control. So there is a continuum, and there is a progression. A lot of the old mediums in the Victorian years, they had no education. Some of them couldn't read or write. And James Johnson Morse, the great forerunners, they were bartenders. They started off Hudson Tuttle. Another Tuttle was the American inspirational medium. Again, started off without any education. They were very, very uneducated, but the spirits, through their trance, because they took them into the unconscious trance, educated them. The spirits gave them vocabulary, the concepts, and as they then evolve, they move from unconscious to conscious. So then they were able to bring their education into their daily waking lives, into their conscious selves. So, and then some of them moved over into the exceptionally into inspirational mediums, as J.J. Morse did. So yes, there is a progression, absolutely, and between the three. And conscious trance is the telepathic trance. One thing I could just add to that is that in the book I talk a lot about the wartime mediums who worked at the London Spiritualist Alliance. And a lot of their readings are documented in the book. Bertha Harris, Elizabeth Bedford, Pamela Nash. I mean, these mediums were absolutely phenomenal. What they were doing in the war years, when millions of people were, being obliterated, and every mother had lost a son, and every father had lost, a son, or wife had lost a husband. The tragedy of war, their mediumship was just phenomenal, and how they worked in these telepathic trances is documented in the book as well. How they came in and out of trance. There was a panel of distinguished academics Amwell et al. I don't know what the et al. Stands for, but I know one of them was Sir John Anderson, academics who got some of the prominent mediums in the UK, Estelle Roberts, Helen Hughes, Annie Britton, and there's another one somewhere, Lillian Bailey, got them all together and observed their trance. They had to perform for them. And they observed the speed that they came in and out of the trance states. It was imperceptible, like Helen Hughes with Whitefeather coming out of the trance states. Literally within 10 seconds, 20 seconds, she was out of the trance. So it was the speed, the lightness of the trance, but the rapport was far more developed. So they could often start their readings, and this is the crux of the research in chapter 10, describes how they used to read for people via the aura. Like Bertha Harris, she'd start off reading for somebody via the aura, and then in a psychic reading, reading the personality, and then she would move into the trance state. So the trance is it moves by degrees. Like I said at the beginning, you move into the state. There's degrees of influence, and as the degrees of influence deepen, then the medium's consciousness also deepens in that way. So, and that was the telepathic trances that were referenced by Mrs. Willett, as opposing the telurgic trances, the old trances, which were very depleting for the medium's health. So that was the whole, crux of the research, was documenting how the trance changed, something that's never been talked about before or looked into.
I find it fascinating. I can't wait to read your research.
Oh, thank you so much. It was literally 10,000 of hours of of over many decades of it was such a complex project to bring it all together. And then I went into automatic writing as well to define automatic writing, because that's never been defined before, the different categories of automatic writing, other than Allan Kardec making an attempt at that. None of it was really coherent. There was no thread that went through the descriptions of automatic writing. But using the telurgic trance and the telepathic automatic writing, then I could define it into different categories, into the 4 different, so people can understand it, because automatic writing is a big thing. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Sally Taylor.
Hi, thank you, Sunny, for coming and sharing all of this with us. I'm going to have to watch this again just to wrap my head around everything you've already said. But I found really interesting your description of rough control, because I did have the opportunity to sit with Stuart Alexander a year ago. And it was like the first one that he had done since COVID. And I was very surprised, because I didn't expect for him to have this sort of spasmodic episode as he went into trance. So he apparently does experience what you were describing, and I'd never heard that described before, so thank you for that. Yes. Also, I sat with Scott Milligan earlier this year, and I don't know that it had that. It was a large seance, so with a lot of loud singing, so I might have missed it if it happened. But he also had essentially his pulse stopped.
Yes.
As part of control by, his team, which was also disconcerting to me, because nobody warned me about that. I thought, oh no, we've killed the medium. But anyway, thank you again. The question that I have for you is, do you teach any of this? I'm curious, how learnable is trance that you have found, and do you teach classes?
Look, I have done many workshops over the decades on trance. I don't teach it anymore. It is something really, it's obviously specialized. I know they do some, wonderful, you've probably been to the Arthur Finlay College, they do some wonderful courses there. Scott teaches it, of course, and people like that. It's probably like, the idea of learning it at an estate. It's good to get the theoretical background, but then at the end of the day, then you need to go away and do it yourself.
And actually do it, right?
And do it, yeah. And as I said in the book, it's all about just getting a collection of sitters And in the book that I've written, the first part of the book is the research, and the second part of the book is called Your Development. So I'm glad you brought this question up, because obviously that escaped my my mind in this talk today. The second part of the book is called Your Development. And so in Your Development is everything you need to know of how to develop trance. So this is like a whole developmental course that's in the back half, the second part of the book.
I look
Using
forward to reading it.
Yeah, thank you. Drawing from the research in the first part and then extending into the but what you said with rough control, yes, it was something, particularly with the old mediums. One little point that I make is that they, like Leonora Piper, they went into what's called spontaneous entrancement, and a lot of this in the research stemmed from mesmerism. So it was mesmerism. A lot of the early mediums were mesmerized, were mesmerists, and hypnotized. Well, hypnotism was a branch out of mesmerism, but mesmerism was the forerunner of hypnotism. And they were, taken into the mesmeric state. So they were mesmerized. And in that mesmerized state, a lot of the mediums went unconscious because their etheric bodies were drawing out very quickly. And because they weren't attuned, in teaching, you hear the word attunement. You hear about conscious cooperation, moving into the trance, developing it slowly. But they didn't develop it, so they developed it literally overnight, spontaneously. So they had no way of regulating the withdrawal of the etheric double. So it used to come out very, very quick. That was, particularly with Leonora Piper. Her experience was a blind clairvoyant called Dr. Koch, Dr. Koch, and she was spontaneously entranced with this healing medium called Dr. Koch, and so this is how she got into it. But the point I'm trying to make is that as it progressed, even with Gladys Osborne, the clonic jerking and the rough control wasn't as strong with Gladys because she moved into it over a longer period of time. It took her many, many months. It could have been years before she was first entranced, because the spirit guides were working on her aura, on the etheric double, bringing it out slowly and not rapidly and uncontrollably, as it did do with somnambulistic mediums. So there is there's a slight difference here. Mediums still have the jerking, like Stuart Alexander. There is still some of the jerking, but it was nothing like the rough control that Leonora Piper had, which observers described as being one of the most shocking, including Sir Oliver Lodge, one of the most shocking sights they'd seen, because it was really just so extreme. The physiological effects on the bodies of some of the old mediums in this way. So it did progress even through Gladys Osborne, and I split their mediumship up with Gladys Osborne in the chapter 5, where I describe all the phases of this control, as opposed to Leonora Piper in chapter 6, to describe the differences. And just one more point I'd make is that James Johnson Morse, who described what's called the trance induction, the induction of trance, the 3 stages. One of the greatest writers and trance mediums who've ever existed. This book, he talks about the ethereal fluids, and to be honest, I don't think anybody could ever understand what he was trying to say, because the language is so old. And there's no context to understand what he was saying. But I do believe that the research in this book would now enable any student of modern day spiritualism, or the history of spiritualism, or channeling, or whatever, to actually understand what he was meaning by this trance induction, because there's 3 stages in the trance induction of the deep trance process that now I believe people can understand. And that's really why I wanted to write the book, so that people could have this understanding. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonny.
Thank
Cheryl?
you. Thanks.
So, for me, it kind of started out weird, so I'm kind of trying to see if you can maybe backtrack me a little bit. So originally, what had happened was I was in like a red bed tent when I was a kid, and I remember talking to people. So, I remember that event. But then when I had a loss, probably about 5 years ago now, I started having photographs popping up with just the white misty kind of facial figure. And then that moved into more of the tarry black silhouette kind of figure. And I had one of those circumstances where you're saying about kind of like maybe like the jerking or whatever. So I had the jerking, and my legs and arms had ended up being numb for probably approximately a week because my potassium dropped. Mm-hmm. So I ended up having to have a few treatments literally at the hospital because of that. But it wasn't my intent to go into trance at all. It just kind of just started happening naturally. And then I was like, wait, what is happening? I don't know any of this. I don't know what's going on. Started, trying to research, pick up the books and everything. And after researching things and then I kind of like recently over the last couple months, I was like, what really is this about? So I went and I did my ancestry, and I'm an ancestor of D.D. Hume.
Oh, well, there you go.
So I found that, but like the history between Hume and the Cooks is very convoluted because the Cooks ended up kicking Hume out by calling him evil. So unfortunately, my family has not progressed yet in that. And so I still kind of feel like that person that doesn't belong anywhere because it's still, unfortunately, they've still adapted that this is like an evil thing, to have happen. And kind of like one of the other bigger ones that I had, kind of two things there. I stepped out of the shower one day and my friend had called me and she was like, whoa, what is that? And I know you were just talking about like the horizontal netting in that. Uh-huh. She snapped a photo because she started seeing images within that. Uh-huh. So this photo literally has like hundreds and thousands of faces all over it, but with my significant other's image just right here, right beside me, as if he was just standing right there. So, like, we had that one, and then I made, like, a stupid decision, and that's what I'm going to call it. I thought that it would be okay to have Himalayan lights in my house.
Yeah.
So, we were like, what the heck is going on in our house? Why are these things happening? Without a clue before all that started occurring. So, the couple of problems is, one, they said Hume didn't have control. So I'm kind of wondering if you have any thoughts on why exactly Hume didn't have control over when things were occurring. And kind of my second question would be, do you think now that since it progressed from like the, I got hit in the face kind of thing to now what's happening is I'm seeing this very pink light with the white in it, and my significant other represented 7 times in that. So there are 2 rooms in the house that glow pink, and the other ones that glow green. So is that more of the telepathic stage, would you say?
Yeah, well, there's many different moving parts here in your in your aura, and so there are, as I say, it's not just sort of one size fits all, really. That's how I describe it. With the old days, yeah, in terms of not always having control, it was documented many times. Fanny Conant, who was a great American medium, I think again she was from Boston. Alan Putnam wrote about her in the 1870s, 1880s. Her mediumship, there were things where she lost control. I think there was North American Indians that came through and they had a big fight and all types of stuff went. It was quite bizarre to hear about it, this reported, but obviously there were, in the early days, as Ursula Roberts also talks in her book, they didn't have knowledgeable development circles. There was no teachers. The Fox sisters, again, you sort of go back to their, what was going on with them. They were the depletion of the etheric body in a lot of the old, and this is talked about in the book as well. The depletion of the etheric double caused a lot of the old mediums to become, chronic alcoholics. They suffered from alcoholism, or they suffered from mental debilitation. So there were physiological effects on the body through this uncontrolled release of the etheric double, uncontrolled because it wasn't, they didn't develop it slowly. There wasn't a conscious cooperation between their guides, their controls, and themselves. So obviously, this is something that has evolved now, from those old days, but it was, there was such a power that, William Eglantine, if you look at his work, the English physical medium, and there was a place he went to in Belgium where there were so many earthbound spirits, and there was like a whole war. The whole place was just shaking with the power of these. So really, the emphasis now is on conscious cooperation and the psychology. And in the second part of my book, that Your Development, it talks about the difference between psychic inspiration and spiritual inspiration. So psychic inspiration is releasing the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind is that part of the mind, the personality, that gets in the way of spirit. So the self gets in the way of the spirit. So it's about healing this part of the self, which is the spiritualization of trance mediumship, bringing it to higher levels so that the personality is no longer first and foremost in the in the trance process. So but good question, and a lot of history. There's so many books to read. William Eglantine, read his book, and Madam Ellen Putnam, Fanny Conant. This stuff has gone on, but it was the early days, as I was saying. It was only because of a lot of it was because it wasn't developed. It wasn't developed through a conscious cooperation. It was developed very quickly, spontaneously. So when the mediums did exude their etheric double, when their ectoplasm, their physical aura, because this is what it is, the physical aura expanded, it was sometimes there wasn't that control. That control wasn't there. Thank you. Thanks,
Cheryl. Regina?
Thank you.
Thanks, Sonny. This is amazing and fascinating and wonderful, and I just learned a glossary of words I'd never heard of. Never heard of. But that's okay. There's so much. Now, the book you're actually talking about, is that the one that's called Secret Psychic Mediumship?
Yes, okay. That's right. Yes, yeah.
Okay. You keep mentioning the book, and I'm thinking,
yes,
I'm pretty sure.
No, not the Secret Psychic Medium. It's called Trance and Inspirational Control.
It's not on your site then.
It is, yeah. It's on the site, Trance, and it's there on the site. Yeah, there's 3 books. There's 3 books. Wendy will probably
the one on the left. I'll just show you.
There, Inspirational Control. Okay, gotcha.
That's right. That's the one.
That's the one you've been speaking on. That's just recent. Yeah. Okay, with all the history that has
all the history. Yeah, that's right. So the research is part A, and then Your Development is part B. So it sort of goes through, but it's 160 books have been referenced, and a lot of them are out of print or very rare books, that have been unobtained.
Fantastic. And my question to you, since most of these words I have not heard of, and that's okay, I have somnambulation. somnambulism.
Somnambulism, yes,
How's that even spelled? So what does it mean when you're in a sleeping trance, or?
Yes, yeah, it's somnambulism. That's right. It's like where the spirits they came to delta, I'd say. You know, from how you go from alpha, theta, delta, epsilon, flatlining. So you have the different hertz waves, like megahertz or electrical impulses per second. Most people are operating around the alpha, and you have beta, the alpha, and then you come into theta. I think theta is between 16 and 8 megahertz per second. Oh no, theta is between 8 and 4. Alpha is between 16 and 8, and then delta is between 4 megahertz electrical impulses per second, between 4 and 0.5, which is then epsilon or flatlining. So you have the different states. So somnambulism is where they come into the delta. And really, when you have general anesthetic and you've been operated, you come down into the delta, and then the lungs stop obviously moving. So in general anesthetic in surgery, the lungs are kept going. And this was the idea that with some of these old physical mediums or deep trance mediums, such as Leonora Piper and Gladys Osborne, the spirits would then, because it was telergic, they were operating their motor nerves. There's motor and motor nerves and speech nerves, the two sets of nerves in the medulla oblongata. So the motor nerves would keep the lungs moving, so the medium then would not forget to breathe. It's like sleep apnea. Sleep apnea. If you go so deep with sleep apnea, as you've probably heard of, the lungs stop breathing. And it's the same mechanism with that trance, because they went so low. With one reported issue by the book under Charlie Broad, which documented Gladys Osborne, a fascinating writer. He did a lot of research. One of the spirits that took over Gladys Osborne forgot to breathe. So Gladys Osborne started to suffocate, and so they had to then, reassert. Obviously, they had to get the spirit main control had to come in and get the other spirit out, and
that happens.
Started breathing again. Yeah, well, it used to happen. Yeah, it was, but that was through somnambula. That was through the deeper. No,
it's happened to me. So when I go under, and so there are times when it's much lighter, but there are often times, usually, they'll get me up and wander around the room with my eyes closed, and I'm talking and doing whatever, but I'm still there. So although other people have seen other things around me, which I'm of course unaware of because my eyes are closed.
That's right.
But even when I open my eyes and I'm in these deep states, I'm not seeing anything. The entity is definitely looking at the other individuals. It's very interesting. I'm just so fascinated. I can't wait to get your books. Thank you for everything, for the information and the research. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Gloria.
Yes, thank you, Sunny. I also want to thank you for obviously all the work that you've done, and I can't wait to read your book. I have heard Scott Milligan's assistant and others, even James Van Praagh, they refer to, because you brought it up, they refer to the possibility that the trance won't take place because there isn't enough energy in the room. And you mentioned the importance of sitters. Could you say something about how spirit uses the sitters to build energy for the medium?
Yeah, thank you, Gloria. Well, I'd first point I'd make is that this would perhaps be more a lot more pertinent, a lot more relevant to physical mediumship, the actual physical side of it. With mental mediumship, it doesn't rely on as much on the energy in the room, the mental trance, should I say, because it's very much about the spirits coming to the medium's soul body. Because mental trance works on the inner level, so the medium's astral body or the medium's soul body is impressed upon by a spirit entity or a communicator. Was with the physical mediumship, physical trance, obviously energy is taken from all the sitters. So the energy is built up, the ectoplasm in the room, the energy, even when you sit with physical mediums, if you're a medium yourself or sensitive, you'll feel a lot of pulling in the solar plexus chakra, a lot of pulling. And because the spirit team do take ethereal fluids, they take ectoplasm from all the sitters. So sometimes you'll have this tugging feeling. I did have it, I think, when I sat with Scott Milligan. I did feel that in my, quite strong, as with other mediums, David Thompson, different mediums. I've sat with mediums back to the 1980s, and some very good mediums that people never heard of before, physical mediums. But this is always, this is always felt. And yes, in that way, you're correct. You need the right conditions in the room for the blend to happen. And if those conditions aren't there, then you can have what they call in spiritualist terminology as a blank seance, they call it, a void seance. This has happened. William Eglantine, in his book, I think it's by John Farmer, wrote the book, The Life and Times of William Eglantine, prolific English physical medium. He used to have materializations under moonlight in the garden. He was on the bench and spirits would materialize, in the garden. And he documented all the seances that he had and how many of them were actually blank seances. And there were quite a few in those days that were blank seances. They didn't. Helen Duncan would be another one. Not every seance was able to go forward in that way. I think also the Monday mediums who do work in dark seance mediums, such as David Thompson, Scott Milligan, Stuart Alexander, they generally, I think they normally do have something always happens. Why in some of the older days there were blank seances, I'm not sure. Maybe it was because they were doing more with light, there was more light involved. But yes, absolutely, conditions are important in answer to your question.
More comment. I also got to do a seance, sit in a seance with Scott Milligan, and I happened to be sitting next to Dominic Bogue, I believe his name is pronounced.
Oh, yes.
Comedian. And when the seance was over, and Scott in his heavy chair and his cabinet was completely turned 180 facing the wall, and we were all, how could that happen, and away from, and moved a great distance from where he started, and the room was disheveled from how it had been organized prior. I was just so in amazement, and we were holding hands, of course, and I was holding hands with Dominic, and Dominic has evidently been in seances with Scott for quite some time. And his comment to me was that this was, and I'm paraphrasing, these weren't his exact words, but what we were experiencing was very gentle compared to how spirit started with Scott, that it was much more violent, I believe is the word he used at the beginning. And Scott has learned and spirit has learned they work together more gently now. And he's just being spun around in his chair instead of whatever they were doing with him at the beginning. And I thought that's very interesting. Scott's learning and spirit's learning. In other words, it's coming together in their experience. Yeah,
there's evolution, I guess. All mediums do evolve. I know, this chair phenomena is quite, I think if I could share an experience, one of the most amazing things we had a room when I was at an apartment. It was a small room and there was 20 people in the room. And it was a 32-degree day, September, I think, 2013. A 30-degree day in Brisbane because it's the tropics, very humid in Brisbane. And no aircon, and we had the cabinet. This was in my back bedroom. David Thompson was the medium, and the spirits actually asked to put the red light on at the end of a seance so we could see him, check the cable ties, everything cable tied in the chair. And 10 seconds later, the chair was levitated out of the cabinet. and turned back to front. And it was amazing. And but the conditions then, it was 32 degrees in the room, 30 people. There's hardly any oxygen. Even the other circle leader, she was almost. Christine was almost, had to stop because she was running out of oxygen. The medium had a cardigan on. He was a cardigan, and he was cool. So this is like an example of the extrusion of the etheric double, the vitality body, as as has been called, the power that was built under remarkable conditions. I think that was one of the most remarkable, chair levitation I've seen under the conditions. But the chairs have also been levitated to the old mediums. They used to levitate them to 4 meters. 4 meters, yeah. I think at Kingswell House, I think he was he levitated his chair and his head touched the ceiling or left some mark on the plaster. And these old houses that was like 4 meters high. The height to the roof, and quite remarkable what they do with these chair levitations. It's like they do it through pseudopods, where they have like legs made out of the ectoplasm and little stickers, little pseudopods that they put under the chair. So they use them as something called cantilevers, and in the cantilevers, then they lift the chair. The ectoplasmic forms rods, because within the ectoplasm there's also electrical currents, because it is everything's linked into electricity. Electrons in the body, lifetrons in the astral body, everything has electricity behind it. So it's the electrical currents which create the force field within the ectoplasm that make the ectoplasm, they make it as solid as steel. So the cantilevers and the ectoplasmic rods underneath the chair become as hard as steel. So then they're able to levitate the chair and up to the ceiling, or turn the chair around. It's just mind blowing. It's like takes a lot of something. But thanks, Gloria. That was
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Daniel, your turn.
Yes, this is a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, it's amazing.
Sonny, getting back to some of the phenomena that occurred in the Skoll experiment, and speaking of the wartime mediums, Helen Duncan was in dialogue with the Skoll team, and in the course of that, an apport appeared, which was a newspaper printed in the war years, 1944, I believe, and with an article about her on the front page. Now, when I visited Skoll, Robin showed me their collection of apports, including this newspaper. And it was an incredible experience holding this paper in my hand, which had been printed in the 1940s. The outer pages had just begun to yellow. This is 5 years after it appeared. The inside pages were pure white, as if it had just come off the press. And I was just so blown away by that. Now, what I wonder is, in the process of apporting, my sort of model for it is that the original is a thought form, basically, and that it takes on substance in the seance room. Now, does the energy of that substance, is that provided by the mediums? Is it an aspect of ectoplasm? How would you characterize that? Because these things are perfectly solid objects, and highly detailed. I mean, the newspaper, you can't get more detailed than that.
Yep.
And they had actually had the paper analyzed, and it was confirmed to be newsprint paper produced during wartime. So that's even more mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Danny. I agree with what you say, the thought form, and using obviously using the ethereal fluids, the ectoplasm from the medium's aura. It's a fascinating apports, which is to bring, and then asports, which is to bring back, or apport means to pinch or to take back, the opposite. Because some of them, they often do. The Madame Elizabeth Desperance, who was a very famous Victorian medium, they apported some beautiful lilies, flowers that were just the amazing, some flowers they'd not even seen before. And they stayed for, I think, a few days, and then they disappeared, they dematerialized. So there are these, coming and going. But from what you describe, the thought form, I would believe that they're able to, the thought form is to be able to be seen. How this goes back in time, it may be because how we see time is not linear. As we know, time can go backwards and forwards. So how they then did the examination of the newspaper and verified it to be the exact date of the war years, that's beyond me, beyond my kenning. But or I guess what any of us would know, but could be some aspect to a time warp, really, in this phenomena.
In this case, they had the paper analyzed, and paper produced during wartime was chemically different because there were certain chemicals that could not be obtained during wartime. So the physical paper itself had a very easily analyzed chemical signature to it.
And that was the same, was it? That's what you're saying. That was the same.
And it was the same as what was produced in wartime.
Yeah.
And not at other times. So that was, it was a pretty solid analysis.
I mean, all that I've heard of is that a lot of apports they bring, it has to abide to what's called like spiritual law. It can't be stolen from somebody. For example, like flowers, roses are often come from flower houses where they've been discarded. Treasure, rings, gold, coins has often been apported or from shipwrecks or from graves. They've talked a lot about bringing rings from people's graves. They're obviously buried with them, where they're not going to be missed. So there is no sort of violation, nothing that's been stolen. So whether or not in this instance, Daniel, whether or not it was some aspect of the newspaper that was original, I don't know where it was. You see, it could have been in somebody's attic, or it could have been stored away. It was the Daily Mirror, the old papers. It could have been. It could have been stolen. It could have been stored away somewhere, and the person who had it would never have missed it. Who knows?
That's possible, yeah. Or perhaps it was simply brought through time.
Brought through time. Yeah, there's one or two explanations. It was either taken from somewhere, a physical location, or, as you say, it was brought through time. Two explanations, but definitely an answer to your question. It comes through the medium's physical aura. It comes through the medium's physical aura. I know one trumpet medium, he had 40 coins, apported American coins, dimes, rare coins through the trumpet. And I think his spirit team, I think they were working on it for 5 years, and they all came through the trumpet into the seance room, these 40 coins all crashing through. So they work. The strong physical mediums, probably the strongest I believe was probably the Christ, the Christ spirit, who when he lived, obviously was able to do the fishes and loaves because he was able to visualize them in the astral, and the blueprint for the fishes and loaves, and then then they were able to be dragged through the atmosphere and coming into the physical plane of existence. So it's amazing, though. Yeah.
It wasn't, and the Skull people actually were told explicitly that the apports were not stolen or inappropriately removed from their original location, and that some of them, I believe they said that some of them also might have belonged to persons in this lifetime from another lifetime.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's possible to verify that, but
it's interesting.
Interesting, yes.
It just pushes all the parameters of physics and science. It completely blows out of the water. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you.
Julia.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Sonny. You're such a lovely, warm-hearted and sincere presenter. We're all thoroughly enjoying this.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you. Lovely to hear from you.
Could you just kindly clarify the term etheric double? I may have misunderstood you because it's a bit late here in England now. But Arthur referred to this as being our true enduring form. But I think you said that the etheric double passed with the physical body. So are you interpreting the etheric double in a different way to perhaps Arthur Finlay did?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I can give, some examples like with the research here. Originally, it was a term that was talked about in Theosophy by Arthur Powell in his book called The Etheric Double. So it was actually talked about as being a body of, an etheric double body. And then this was authenticated. Obviously, Chico Xavier here, he talked about it, the neuropsychic emanations. They belong to the physiological field. They're disintegrate at death. It cannot separate from the body any more than the astral body. And then we delve more into it. And then we find that all the spiritualist mediums and writers, they all talk about it in the same way. Like Gordon Higginson, he talked about the physical aura, and he says it suffers disintegration at death. So the etheric body is the physical aura. Bertha Harris, she talks about the etheric double. She says it's a bioplasmic body that acts as a bridge between the physical and astral body and allows the spirit thoughts to travel. So it's the bridging body. You have Geraldine Cummins in her book. Her friend Eileen, the lady she knew called Eileen, was in the sleep states, and her friend had passed into the spirit world, and she was traveling at night. She was sleep state traveling, and she came in contact with her friend's astral body while she was in the etheric body. And because the two have a separate time rhythm, there's a different time rhythm to the etheric body, the etheric double to the astral body. The spirits told her that to touch the astral body would be dangerous for her, and she recognized her friend was still in her astral body. She'd not gone into her friend was in the etheric body, not in the astral body, because when she was alive, she had a scar that was on the forehead, and this scar was always covered by a headscarf, and it was only verification with her family that they knew then that she had this scar. She saw her friend Anne, who died while she was sleep traveling, and then she saw the scar. So she knew then it was the etheric body that was being shown, that her friend had not gone into her astral body. There's an altering of the time rhythm between the two bodies. There's many. Grace Cook in her book, she talks about the etheric body. It's like the lower etheric body produces ectoplasm. Ivy Northridge, she talks about the inner aura is a physical field of energy from the release of etheric particles. So again, this is the inner aura, the etheric double. There's so much documentation. Ursula Roberts, George Chapman, who is the great healer with William Lang, the trance healer. He was in his book with Roy Stemmen. Roy Stemmen's a great writer, written many valuable books to spiritualism. They also talk a lot about the etheric double. The etheric body is a bridging mechanism between the astral body and the physical body. And this is what Bertha Harris in her book with George Meek, the book that she wrote, also describes it in the same way. So even though we started off with it being a theosophical talk with Arthur Powell, all the spiritualist mediums and commentators, they all concur as all the evidence is talking about this body. So the etheric body is the body that coats all the neurons. And Geraldine Cummins, who was one of the most prolific writing mediums of the last century, she talks a lot about this as well, about its operation and how it works. But so if that just gives you a little bit more context and probably just explains a little bit more.
Sonny, if I could interrupt there, I think Arthur Finlay uses the term in a very unique way to what we would consider the astral body. Arthur Finlay always talks about on the edge of the etheric, and he uses the term as he's in his etheric body, but he uses it in a very unique way.
Yes, yeah.
So I think that's the confusion.
Yeah, it's understanding it, and I think the research, the drive of the research was to bring all the, you know, the spiritualist mediums, the commentators, every aspect of research is fully referenced in APA style, American Psychiatric Association, which is the academic style. So every reference has the book and the year the book's written, or the page number, so that you can refer back to it. Including the lectures. So all the overwhelming body of information, they were all saying exactly the same thing, and that there is, I do believe, when we sleep at night, this is what Geraldine Cummins said, when we sleep at night, it's the etheric body that coats all the nerves, as Bertha Harris said, it's the intermediary body. So when we sleep, we have the etheric body actually has thought imprints on it. So when we're in the daytime, our thoughts, they imprint upon the etheric body. So when we sleep at night, the etheric body, because it's the etheric double, it displaces naturally. So every night when we sleep, it pulls away from the body. And as it pulls away from the body, these nerve visions between the etheric material and the neurons in the brain, they actually play out as nerve visions. These are dreams. And that's why we have to dream at night, because they're playing out. So when the etheric material comes back to the neurons when we wake up, then we feel refreshed, because the thoughts of when I say thoughts, these are our subconscious thoughts that we have during the day. They build up, they cause pressure upon the etheric body. And this is why we get nerve irritation. So when we're tired, we start to get a lot of jumbled thoughts. Thoughts are replaying and going over, we start to have nonsensical thoughts, don't we? We get tired, extremely tired. So the sleeping, the etheric body material comes away from the brain, the neurons, and the thoughts from the etheric material play out as nerve visions, which is the sleep states. So when we come back, the etheric material then repositions itself, the etheric double. So we look really at falling dreams. Those of you who've gone to sleep very quick and you feel, coming back, you're falling back to your body. This is just that when you've been extremely tired, often with falling dreams, the etheric double has come out too quick from the brain. The neurons has come out too quick, and it snaps back again. Because again, we know with ectoplasm, which is the etheric body, the etheric double comes out. If the physical medium has a shock, it snaps back, it comes rushing back to the body. So, this is obviously on a micro scale. This is just a good example I give to stress the points.
Thank you, Sonny. Sherry?
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Sonny. I just wanted to get back. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just wanted to get back to the thing about apports, and I don't know if it was you or Dan who said that it begins as a thought form. So then, in essence, I was very fortunate that this ring I received with Kai Moog. In Albany in last April, we watched him bring a lot of ectoplasm from his mouth. They opened a tent and we watched it go clear down to the floor. And then the red light was turned off. It was quite dark and the ectoplasm kind of morphed into a ball. And then it became a blue light. And we were all looking at this blue light. And then the spirit guide said that gave my name and said I could come up and reach into this light, into this portal. So are we saying that this ring was not a non-physical thought form at some point, and then it was fleshed out when it came into physical reality, in that I reached in to this blue light. Yep. There was a feeling of much energy kind of gently pulling my hand, and the guide told me to reach in and see what I felt. and to gently pull it out. Actually, I felt a necklace with beads, and I pulled that, and this ring was on the necklace, like strung on the necklace. Did this start out non-physical and then become flesh as it entered into our reality? Or was it dematerialized and then rematerialized? What do people, I just would like to know what you think.
Just quickly, I just want to clarify, Sherry, that when I said that the apport began as a thought form, what I actually should have said was that between its initial physical existence in its original location and time and its manifestation during the seance, that it was transported as a thought form.
Okay,
that's closer to what my intention was. So I apologize for not being clear about that.
No apology necessary, Dan, but thanks. That's what I kind of thought, that it came from another time or place, realm, and then somehow was able to be dematerialized and brought through this portal, which I'd never seen anything like that with before. Quite extraordinary. Well, thank you for clarifying that, because I didn't understand it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Thanks, Sonny. While I'm thinking about it, next week our speaker is researcher Rob Simperman, and his topic is miracles and the collective creation of reality. So I think you might find that very similar to what we're talking about. Sonny, you're a healer, and I'm just curious about the relationship between trance and healing. Now, we know that a lot of people find that when they go into trance, they're more effective as a healer. Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Wendy. That brings me, I think it's chapter 12 in my book. I do that chapter in the book is dedicated to healing mediumship. And that goes through all what we've talked about today with the different forms of healing mediumship. As we talked about today, there's conscious trance and there's unconscious trance, or there's stages of trance where the medium's awareness is withdrawn, should we say. So again, in this healing, the chapter of the book about the healing mediumship, I explain this in great detail. There were two opposing schools of thought. It was only opposing because Harry Edwards sort of made it so at the time, but that was between him and George Chapman. Harry Edwards was a conscious trance medium. He always stayed in the conscious states of trance, and George Chapman, through his spirit surgeon, Dr. William Lang, who was an ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon, who the degree of research, the degree of evidence that William Lang existed was undeniable, indisputable. It was amazing, the life story of George Chapman. So if ever you get to read that book, The Spirit Surgeon, George Chapman, by Roy Stemmen. Roy Stemmen, who's still alive, he worked with George Chapman. He was very friendly with George Chapman, and George Chapman's work as a deep trance healing medium. He brought amazing evidence in the deep trance state. He just worked in deep trance all day, George Chapman. Was Harry Edwards worked in the conscious state. And there was a time where Harry Edwards said that obviously to work as a healer, you had to work in a conscious state because you had to have the attunement with the spirit people, so that then you could give diagnosis and you could actually bring intuitive diagnosis into the healing session. So there's a difference of opinion. Although they did at the end of their lifetime, they did reconcile, and Harry Edwards did come around to George Chapman. He knew that what George Chapman was doing was wonderful in terms of the scientific community, because George Chapman attracted the interest of a lot of scientists and researchers in his deep trance mediumship, who also could see the value in what he was doing. So Harry Edwards did have a little bit of a change of heart, but there was a bit of confliction at one point where he did He says, you have to develop from the unconscious state to the conscious state to find the attunement. Particularly, Harry Edwards gave examples with mental illness, so that if you were, working with somebody, then you could, in the conscious state, you could actually bring diagnose the condition, or you could actually approach the healing in a way which was more patient-centric. So it was more, it could gear more towards meeting the patient's healing needs in that way. But two different schools of thought. But yes, the chapter 12 in the book does go into that. It also goes into the healing mediumship of Lily the healer, who is one of the most phenomenal healers who's ever lived, by Desmond Shaw. Again, it's a rare book out of print, but there are a lot of quotes in the book, from the book, about Lily the healer. And again, a lot of physical mediumship we can see actually comes into healing. A lot of physical mediumship actually comes into the healing, because there's lots of physical phenomena that occurred in the healing. So, such as bone grafts with Lily. Somebody there was giving obviously some bone that had fractured. There was grafting the bone, and again, you see, we would return back to the etheric body. The etheric double, they was using the particles of the etheric double to repair the bone, so that the bone could heal. And this was part of the psychic surgery that occurred with Lily the healer, with his guys, Dr. Latari, who was Lily's main guide. I'm not sure if he was a Persian or who he was, but he was Dr. Latari. And he was doing this bone graft. And also in George Chapman's book, also these bone grafts were talked about, using the etheric body, again, the etheric particles, to actually repair the organs. In George Chapman's book, there was an organ that was repaired. I can't remember what organ it was in the body, but they repaired it using the etheric material from the etheric double, which is the etheric particles, the ectoplasm, whatever you call it. But in the same way, this followed through into Lily. Lily the Healer's book by Desmond Shaw.
Fascinating. One of the phenomena that we often encounter in physical mediumship, even in mediumship as it's developing, is trance puppetry, where I can remember my friend Louise Herman talks about the fact that suddenly she has no control over her body, because the entity is wanting to drum, and so she suddenly finds herself moving her hands, drumming. And we have these cases of Stuart Alexander talks about the fact that he sometimes has no control over his body. The entity, and this is one of the reasons why the trance medium needs to be tied down. The physical medium needs to be tied down, because as the entity thinks about moving, he finds himself moving. Do you have any thoughts on this? What we call trance puppetry?
Yeah, there's just one thing that came to mind before I talk about that, was something called psychoplastic transfiguration. Einar Nielsen, the physical medium, the Icelandic medium from Reykjavik, he was documented where if there's not enough ectoplasm present, the spirits will remove the cable ties of the medium, take them out of the cabinet, walk them around the room in red light, I think, with these mediums, and they'd form an ectoplasmic mask over the medium of the spirit who was talking, be it a relative or a guide. So everybody could see the ectoplasmic mask of the spirit who was talking. And if it was a lady, for example, but then they would see the medium's hairy arms and the outline of the medium. So this was one example of even though they cable tied them, they could still come out of the cabinet, because the medium's Stuart Alexander. He doesn't come out of the cabinet, I know, but he did experiments where they removed the cable ties. They could pass his hand in and out of the cable ties. They were doing this while he was in the deep trance state. So this psychoplastic transfiguration documented under Einar Nielsen, and there are other mediums that have I won't mention names, but another medium that this was, purported to have happened in Monday era. It's interesting. So this is one aspect, the psychic puppetry. Again, another aspect I talk about with this was the aspect of, and again, reading the book with the, what was the name of, I've got it written down somewhere, the Gifford Thomas, somewhere, it was as an artist.
Thomas Gifford.
Thomas Gifford, that's right, Thomas Gifford. Yeah, that's one. The artist Thomas Gifford. Well, yeah, that's amazing. Thomas Gifford, and he was he was actually in the deep. He channeled the artist. I didn't write his name down. Just bear with me. It's in the book. Oh wait, here it is. Yeah, he was Frederick Thompson was the artist. I knew he was Father Thomas. So Frederick Thompson, Mrs. Chenoweth was the medium who brought the evidence and told Thomas Gifford, obsessed with Robert Gifford, Frederick Thompson, that was it. He was obsessed with Robert Gifford. So Robert Gifford was a spirit artist. Frederick Thompson was the medium. And Mrs. Chenoweth gave Frederick Thompson a reading and said, yes, you are actually, channeling this artist, Frederick Thompson. Now, Frederick Thompson, who was channeling the Robert Gifford, the deceased artist, was able to paint in exactly the same style and even sign off in his signature. And again, this, you could say this is an aspect of the movement, the puppetry, that the neuro responses, the spirit coming up to the soul of the medium. I separate it from physical mediumship. I look at it more through mental trance, not physical trance. I look at it through the artist would come up to the soul body of the medium and impress the soul body of the medium with the thoughts so strong so that the soul body of the medium then reflects the thoughts over to the physical brain of the medium. And in the book I've written under chapter 5, I do explain this in great detail with Gladys Osborne Leonard, how this occurs. Incredibly complex, but I've tried to put it in such a way that anybody can understand it. But this idea that it's all about thought transference. And in the chapter on inspirational writing, to go back to this trance puppetry, the chapter on inspirational writing, where I talk about Chico Xavier, his scripts for survival evidence, where he actually did prolific work in front of audiences, Chico Xavier. There's a YouTube of him doing this, although it's actually in Brazilian, I think it's Portuguese. If somebody could translate, that would be good. But he's actually doing audience readings. In Brazil, I think it was 30,000 people a year died in road accidents or something crazy like that. So the amount of mothers who'd lost children, in road accidents or families, he was bringing them through, writing, even signing their signatures of the ones who died, their full names, their every detail you possibly could imagine. Phenomenal evidence he brought, Chico Xavier. And he, again, this was the imprint, obviously, with his moving his hands with the pen. You could also, this is like the trance puppetry, but it occurs through the neurological response. It's a neuro response of the thought form being transmitted to his soul body. So the spirit walks up to his soul body and brings the thought into the soul body. And then it's from the soul body then that works through his brain, his neurotransmitters, that brings the, as we would say, the impulse. So he knows when he writes, the name, and he knows how to form the signature. So I look at a lot of the trance puppetry in this way. I don't see it as a form of physical mediumship. I see a lot of it as being a form of mental trance or mental mediumship. Frank Lear, the great spirit artist, again, doing art, doing spirit art. It's moving their hands in the right direction. Rosemary Brown, who worked with the tactile communication systems in music, composing notes. Again, it is the same thing, and it works a lot to this degree.
Sonny, just one question before I hand back to Daniel. Am I right in thinking that most of the trance mediums really brought through their own guide rather than multiple people? Like there's, they used to use their own guide would become the medium on the other side. I'm thinking somebody like Kai Muga doesn't bring through individual people the way a physical medium does. He brings through his own guide, who then becomes the medium for the other people. Now, what is unique about contemporary trance mediumship or channeling is that the medium now has been able to dispense with the services of the guide and trance channel hundreds of different people direct. And this is what we see with Regina and Jeannie Love. They're able to, they don't seem to mention their guide. They just say, here I am, I'm trance channeling Robin Williams, or here I am channeling someone. Would you not agree that this is like a very important distinction between contemporary trance and historical trance?
Well, absolutely, and this is the whole point of the book. You know, the book that I'm writing about tellurgic control. Say, example, Feeder, who was Gladys Osborne's guide, or Dr. Finwit. There was the little girl guide for Pamela Nash. She was a fantastic medium. Topsy, yeah. Autobiography of a medium by Norman Swain. Documented the life of Topsy. She was in the slave plantations when she died. She was brutalized by the white settlers in the 1800s in the cotton plantations in South America. She was brutalized and died as a little child, and came back because she hated the white people so much. She came back to expunge that thought form, to heal it in an astral consciousness. So she actually came back through Pamela Nash to actually bring healing to white people in London. So the thought forms, the idea that control was very much part of the physical, the physical aspect of the physical aura. The control was working with tellurgic trance, the old styles of trance, not telepathic trance. So yes, absolutely. So telepathic trance is the interchange of spirits. And in the book, I talk about this with Elizabeth Bedford in chapter 10 with her guy called Messenger. Again, she was a prolific trance medium, worked with the Messenger. That was the name of her guide. Worked a lot at the London Spiritualist Alliance, which is, that was the mecca of mediums in the 1930s, 40s in South Kensington, not far from Buckingham Palace, the posh part of London. And all the people used to visit me, Bertha Harris, and the mediums that worked there, Pamela Nash, Mrs. Templecox, Lillian Bailey, they all worked there. They all had their separate little rooms. And in her book, direct reference was given to the interchangeability in telepathic trance of communicators being able to plug in and out of the aura at ease. So she had her guide, the Messenger, would actually come and influence, and then other guides could plug in and out. These guides would be family members. They would actually come and move in and out of her aura. So the interchange was very fluidic. It was like with the older trances, they just had to have one control. Why? Because it was a physical control.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Daniel, am I right in thinking that Jeannie and Regina don't mention their guides when they're bringing through when they're channeling? They're actually
yes, that's generally true of them. That's generally true of them. They do have guides and so on. All of us apparently do, and but in their process, they generally channel more directly, and you can see it you can hear it in the recordings of their channeling of the NASA astronauts, which you can find on our Cosmic Voices Network website. And yeah, I'm not aware of there having to be an intermediate while they're channeling for the most part.
And I think this is something absolutely remarkable now, that if you have a look at the information that comes through a mental medium, you might get 4 or 5 pieces of information, but then when you get a modern channeler, they're actually getting verbatim the speech, which will go for half an hour. It's quite remarkable, the development of information that's coming through this contemporary channeling. Would you not agree, Dan?
Well, yeah, and at the same time, we don't know the mechanisms involved to where we can say, well, there's no intermediate. We
No.
just don't know. It comes through that way. It comes through very smoothly in that way. So whether there is another intermediate presence or not, my impression is that generally speaking, there is not. My late partner, Jane, was also a channeler, and she would sit at the keyboard and channel, do automatic writing directly and channel personally and so on. And it seemed to come, directly from her particular guides or whoever it was she was bringing through. So, and again, one of the things is, you remember, the longest chapter in my book is about language.
Yeah.
And language is such a minefield in this whole area. And speaking of that, I have a question for Sunny about how you, Sunny, have been expressing yourself throughout this session. Which of the higher bodies is the experiencing self in your lexicon?
Which of the higher bodies?
Which of the various bodies is the experiencing self? Or are they all aspects of it? I mean, we experience ourselves as a single entity.
Yes.
Right? For example, in your example about dreams, to whom does the dream appear? To which part of the entity does the experience happen?
Yeah, good question. Thank you, Dan. It was amazing questions and sharing here. It's wonderful. I do talk in the book in chapter 3. I talk about the mind. So I talk about multi-leveled layers of consciousness. There was an author called Bruce, I forget what his name was, who he got my attention. Maybe he's an American writer. He's referenced in the book, and he talks about the multi-level layers of consciousness. So it's almost when we go to sleep, the mind goes into the etheric double, which is actually not it's like a holographic body, and then from then it goes up a gear into the astral body, which is the other body of consciousness, the soul body. And in that book, Esther Dowden, whose guide Johannes, I give a lot of reference to the different aspects of the astral consciousness. So you have intuitive, you have instinctual, you have instinctual, you have intellectual, and you have spiritual. There's the 3 different layers. So the instinctual part of the body would be, as Silver Birch talked about, subconscious, controlling the organs of the consciousness that resides in the body with the deep trance mediums, where the subconscious has a blueprint for breathing. The subconscious has a blueprint for the heart breathing and this layer of consciousness. But as the mind then goes into the astral, you have something which is called intellectual. You move into the intellectual level of consciousness, and then beyond that into the spiritual level of consciousness. So we reside in all 3 levels of consciousness, but we're split between all 3. But I believe in the progression. The intellectual aspect of consciousness is expressing itself through the medium's mind in terms of pictures, of sounds, of words. As you know, when you go into the spirit world, and this again is talked about in the book under Johannes, Esther Dowden's guide, and also a chapter 3 to do with the mind. And also your development at the end. I talk a little bit about this, but the idea that there is in the spirit world, that everything is formed from color and sound. We have form. This is what Johannes talks about. We have form. When we die in the astral, obviously we perceive people, we have sounds, we have colors. And this is actually bound to an aspect of creativity, even within the intellectual mind. There's a lot of creativity, and the healing predominantly comes from the creative arts, as we know, through music, through sound, through writing. So consciousness in its higher forms that machinates is obviously expressing itself a lot through color, art, music, writing, poetry in particularly, and the movement of the mind through poetry. Even when we get into mysticism, we look at Rumi and we look at Khalil Gibran and some of the great poets. A lot of the trance movements into poetry are expressions of the soul, of higher thought, of using the metaphor of pictures and sounds to bring the mind into higher levels of consciousness, not only in becoming closer to the aspect of the God consciousness, but also having that link into deeper feeling, unification of spirits. The idea, I guess, of any trance condition is that the aura in its expansion invites unification with the spirit world, and the opposite of love is separation, and the opposite of separation is unification. So we have this whole orbit really where we do start to grow and expand in this way.
And of course, this is not taking into consideration that we are all multi-dimensional beings. So good luck.
Right.
Good luck, Daniel, trying to actually track it down for the who are we, Look, just before we finish, sorry, Daniel, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's okay. Just a quick anecdote. There's a quote attributed to Johann Sebastian Bach on his deathbed. It says, "Do not cry for me, for I go where music comes from."
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Really
beautiful. So I think Gary had a question.
Just before we get to Gary, can I just quickly bring in Gordon Finn? Gordon, because I feel that you are kind of channeling. Like those of you who have read any of Gordon's work, Gordon does a lot of work with out-of-body experiences where he does spirit rescues, and he does beautiful transcriptions of almost of a conversation between himself and the soul that he's working with. Now, Gordon, do you consider that a kind of channeling? Do you consider that you're actually channeling the consciousness that you're working with? You've got to unmute, Gordon. You there? Come on, I can't unmute you.
Down at the bottom, Gordon. Bottom left.
Bottom left. Well, didn't you say if you hit the space bar, that will unmute?
It should do it unless you have muted everyone.
Oh, well, I think we did mute everybody, and I think Gary muted everyone.
Yeah.
Gordon, we'll come back to you in a second, or you can figure it out. Gary, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, just really quickly, Sunny, this is so fascinating. Clarification of terms, and I love the perspective you approach this from, which is sort of the old school approach. I resonate with that very much. So when we're having an out-of-body experience, we're in the astral body. Would you say that is correct?
Yeah, but there is the multi-leveling experience. Sometimes we go through the etheric double before we get into the astral. I believe some nights I believe we don't fully get into the astral. We're somehow hovering in the etheric double, but then
that would be like lucid dreaming, right?
Yeah,
the etheric double would be.
Yeah. It's the nerve visions, that, like I said with Geraldine Cummins with her book, it's the nerve visions that play out a lot, the etheric double. Well, yes, absolutely. We do. Where what was it? Gladys Osborne. She worked in the unconscious trance with Theda, and she always wanted to work consciously, and. She said to the spirit guides, why can't you just let me work consciously? But they gave her a beautiful, it's called The Last Crossing, was her book, gave her a beautiful experience where they took her into the astral in trance. So it was trance or not, and then she walked through all the fields and saw, it was amazing what she saw. It's just beautiful, yeah. That was amazing. A beautiful, beautiful soul. I mean, she lived, I think it was in Brighton in the UK, and at the end of her life, she was walking along the promenade, and she had so much power around her. The spirits were lifting her. She was walking and she was starting to levitate.
Wow.
The powers they had was just phenomenal. You know, the power was just, yeah. But no, thank you. That's beautiful. Thank you for your comments, and glad you've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Gordon, you've unmuted now. Would you like to join our conversation?
Sure. Of course, I've been listening all along, and you were asking about modern channeling as opposed to old mediumship. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
Well, my wife and I were rereading all the Geraldine Cummings books, which I've had for years, but we just kind of went through them all, and they're great stuff. There's all kinds of interesting things there. What I think about now is, when you're bringing up this point, is the guides that she had and that Hester Dowden had, and people from that era. They always say, here I am, here, I'm ready to begin, that sort of a thing. And they've always got some little sentimental story about who they were in their past life. Like, I used to sell flowers outside the station, which, it sort of appealed to the Victorian sensibility. And I don't feel that either modern channelers, mediums like myself, or the audience for that, really care about that sort of thing anymore. They want something that is modeled on what they see in earthbound media, like interviews, where there's an interviewer and the person being interviewed on another screen, and away it goes. And essentially I didn't personally imitate that model, but I see that's the model I seem to operate on, except I'm not talking to somebody in a studio, or like you in your computer at home. I'm talking to somebody in some level of the astral plane, where I have gone to seek them because I'm interested in what different types of souls have to say about their life in spirit. So then you have fundamentalist ministers, you have politicians, you have actors, you have singers, musicians, you have representatives who think they were a leader in ISIS when they were alive, all sorts of people. Arthur Conan Doyle, I had a nice chat with him at one point. And but I don't see there's anybody in between me and them. And when I look at other channelers, like Regina, I don't seem to see that happening with you either, Regina. You seem to go right there. And I think that's an aspect of modern channeling. And I think it has occurred because all our vibrations, both the channelers and the audience, everybody, our vibrations have gone up from where Victorian and Edwardian, even the channeling of the 1930s, which, I've read quite a bit, not as much as you, Sonny, but I've read quite a bit of it. And it seems to me we're just closer to where the astral beings are. We're not as far away as we used to be. We don't need an intermediary. And when we're doing our retrieval class, I find all kinds of people, some of whom are here today, are able to do a retrieval from the waking state, just sitting, meditating, including people that have never done one before. So again, that says to me, our vibration, the physical plane vibration and the astral plane vibration, both as a large entity and all the souls within them, have come much closer together. That's my take on that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Gordon. That's it. Sonny, would you agree with that?
Yeah, there's like I said, the aspect of the earlier mediums with the tellurgic trance. It was something where they were working more for the physical power, and the telepathic trance, like I said. So that's lifting the minds more. Geraldine Cummings, Chico Xavier, they were talking about raising their level of the mind to the superconscious mind. So that idea of lifting themselves to the superconscious mind, and the progression really, moving from unconscious to conscious to inspirational. There's a fine line then between perception and trance, so you'd actually say the auditory, the astral organs that are working in the trance states, do we need trance? Is it just perception? We can move with clairaudience, mediums that could actually hear word for word, what the spirits were saying. So there's a much finer line between then the trance and the perceptive qualities of trance. But there's many, many moving parts, I'd say, to this. Yeah, having guides introduced it, it's not something I believe when you evolve, it's not, it's not important to have the name of the guide or who the guide is or the story. And there's been so much contention in history. Look at Lillian Bailey, with her guide, and William Cotton, and they tried to track it down, and then, it didn't exist. And then there was all these story with the Obi, so it created like a bit of a, it created a lot of skepticism, really, because they couldn't find the guide was. And at the end of the day, like you say, we've, moved on. It's not always, important, but throughout history, there has been these, things where spirit guides have not always been. Dr. Finuit was a perfect example. Leonora Piper's guide, he could never be verified, and then he changed his name. So it is, when you look at the work of Eileen Garrett, most fascinating trance mediums, and she always said she wasn't a spiritualist, Eileen Garrett. She didn't believe in guides, even though the evidence she gave with the scientists was some of the best evidence that's ever been given, with the airship disaster, the R101, the air disaster, the technical information she gave with the dirigies and the losing height over Achy, the town in the north of France, when it lost height over the church spires at that specific point before the R101 exploded, came down and exploded. So the details that she gave that only she could know before the internet or before people knew what had happened. But she always said she worked with fields of consciousness. She had Ramah and Tahote, and Ramah, and she believed that they were aspects of our own, tapping into the collective consciousness. So there's the whole of that, moving part that also you can go into as well. Even though it was Abdul Latif and Nuvani, even though I think that guide actually came through the physical mediumship of Helen Duncan. So the guides were validated, but she didn't believe in the guides per se. She believed there were aspects of collective consciousness, particularly with Tahote and Rama, and Ira Progoff, who was the Polish psychologist who did a lot of work with Eileen Garrett, and back in the day they were also experimenting with lysergic acid. They were working a lot with LSD back in those days. So, but there's a whole shift. It's not one size fits all. I think there's so many moving parts, and but I agree with you. My trance, I don't. They do talk a lot about the spirit world conditions over there, what they're seeing, what they're doing, but not introducing themselves as a name. I used to do that years gone by, but the work as it's evolved now in my trance mediumship, they're not, they don't, some of the stuff you can see on my website, I've got the survival evidence readings with Patrick. I can't get away from that because he's an Irishman and his accent is there, bringing the survival evidence. Can't get away from that. But the other, there's a North American Indian, there's a Persian, there's the Yehuda. They're separate entities. But as my work has evolved, I have found I've moved beyond this, more into just one, control who comes forward. And it was the same with Silver Birch. He didn't want. He was called, was it Big Jump or something? I forget his name now. He wasn't actually a North American Indian, but that was just the persona he showed. Persona. So
yeah, exactly.
It's what people needed at the time, I guess, because people needed to have a reference point. They didn't have the internet back then, and it wasn't as eclectic, back then as it is now. Oh, thank
Gordon,
you.
Any final thoughts from you?
Well, fascinating research there, Sonny. I can't believe the work you've done. I've done a bit of research myself, but you've done like 100 times more.
Well, it's been, you know, as I say, it's been 40, well, since 1970, been a lot of years working, I guess. And,
Yes,
and,
yes.
and it's not something I've just got into the last 10, 20 years. It's been, even 1988 was when I first started working as a public medium. So I guess it's been a lifetime of work, but it's a passion, like I say, you know, it's been a passion, as you can probably gather, and it's the passion that drives it. You know, where mother of you know, attention is the mother of all memory. Really, as I say, if it grabs your attention, then your memory is stimulated, and you know, yeah, it's anything you're passionate about.
Yes, that's very true. Passion
yeah,
is very important.
it is. Yeah. Thank
Okay,
you,
does
Gordon.
anyone have any last questions before we finish and thank Sonny for his time today and for his passion and for his incredible body of work that he has created? Sonny, how can we help spread the work, what you've done? I know this is your passion. What can we do to help support you?
I mean, I'd love to get the book out a little bit more. I mean, I nearly, you know, being in my 60s, I had one of those horrible blood cancers, the lymphoma cancer, last year, and I was very sick. So I thought, oh, am I going to make it? You know, I spent all this, tell you, it's 13 years writing the book, and then 3 years to get it put together. So the research was 10 years, and it was 3 years getting it so people could understand it, you know, so that it was readable. So yeah, I'd love anybody who could share the link or share my website.
Would you like some attestations from our people? Would that help if we got people to write those who've read the book to write attestations?
Absolutely, that would be, you know, that would be wonderful. And like you say, if you and Victor could give me a testimonial,
certainly
because
will.
you're published authors, and I think I'm just interested in getting as well published authors, because I'd like maybe to take it to, I don't know, maybe one of the publishing houses. One of the great authors I quote in my book, modern day authors, is Michael Timms, who loves his history. Does Michael, you know, loves
I'm sure
his,
we could get Michael to do an attestation for you.
Yeah, if you know him, or you know,
he's a good friend, Michael.
He's a good friend, is he? That would be wonderful.
Absolutely.
I could. That would be just wonderful. I could, if you could send in the book, or
and Gordon, could we get you to do it? Gordon's a very much published author. Could we get you to do an attestation?
Certainly, I'd be happy to do an endorsement. Sure.
And
thank you.
Perhaps Daniel, is Daniel still here? We could get Daniel or somebody,
Daniel.
anybody else. Look, we'll put it out there, Sonny, and we'll see if we can get something happening for you, because the work is amazing. Your body of work as a whole is incredible, and we would love it if you'd be part of our community, so that we can call on you when we need some clarifications on things. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everyone.
It's been lovely having you with us.
Questions and, you know, yeah, just sharing. Beautiful. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you next week.